Nobody opens that drawer. Those were Arthur Pemberton's last words, spoken to his lawyer 3 hours before. A heart attack dropped him like a bad investment. His widow hired me 2 days later. She wanted to know what was inside. I told her I charge $50 a day plus expenses. She didn't blink. Money never does. The Pemberton estate sat in Pacific Heights like a wedding cake nobody wanted to cut. Mrs. Pemberton met me at the door wearing black silk and enough perfume to embalm a small dog. She was 45, trying to look 35, and landing somewhere around expensive. Her handshake was cold. Her eyes were colder. She led me through rooms full of furniture that cost more than my car. Everything was polished. Everything was perfect. Everything screamed loneliness loud enough to wake the dead, which in this case would have been convenient. The study was at the end of a hall that felt longer than my last relationship. The desk was mahogany, the kind they don't make anymore 'cause all the trees got smart and ran away. 6 drawers total. 5 of them opened fine. The 6th one, bottom right, had a lock that looked like it meant business. Mrs. Pemberton stood in the doorway watching me like I was about to perform surgery. Or commit one. He never let anyone near it, she said. Her voice had that particular tremor wealthy women get when they realize their husband's secrets might cost more than their jewelry. Not the maid, not his children, not me. She said me like it was supposed to mean something. In my experience, it usually meant the opposite. I asked her the obvious questions. Did Arthur have enemies? Only the usual kind, she said. Business rivals and disappointed relatives. Was he faithful? She laughed. It sounded like crystal breaking. Did he gamble, drink, chase anything besides profit? No, and no. He was, according to her, as predictable as a train schedule, and twice as boring. I examined the lock without touching it. It was old, European maybe, the kind that predated the war and most modern conveniences. Someone had gone to trouble. You don't install a lock like that to protect your stamp collection. When did he have this put in? I asked. She thought about it. 10 years ago. Maybe 12. A decade is a long time to keep a secret in a drawer. Long enough for whatever was inside to grow roots or rot or both. I walked around the desk. It was clean. Too clean. The blotter had never seen ink. The pen holder held pens that had never been used. This wasn't where Arthur Pemberton worked. This was where he kept his ghosts. I want you to open it, Mrs. Pemberton said. She was standing closer now. I could smell her desperation mixing with the perfume. It wasn't an improvement. Can't do that without permission from the estate, I told her. I'm the estate, she said. Technically true, morally complicated. The kind of complication I usually charged extra for. I told her I'd need to talk to the rest of the family first. She made a sound that might have been a laugh in a previous life. Good luck with that, she said. There were 2 children, she explained. Daughter Margaret, 32, living in New York, worked in publishing. Son Thomas, 28, running the family business into the ground with enthusiasm. Neither of them has spoken to me since the funeral, she added. That was 4 days ago. In my experience, families who stop talking after someone dies usually had plenty to say before. I asked if they knew about the drawer. She shook her head. Arthur never mentioned it to anyone, except his lawyer. And now that lawyer won't return my calls. The lawyer's name was Howard Finch. I knew him slightly, the way you know people who show up at the same bar ordering the same drink. He practiced estate law with the enthusiasm of a man watching paint dry. If Finch was avoiding calls, something had him spooked. I made a note. Spooked lawyers are either very useful or very dead. I left the Pemberton house with a retainer check and a headache. The fog was rolling in from the bay, turning the city into a wet, gray dream. I pointed my car toward Howard Finch's office on Montgomery Street. His secretary said he wasn't in. I said I'd wait. She said he might be a while. I said I had nothing but time. We both knew I was lying. Finch showed up 20 minutes later looking like a man who'd been chased by his own shadow and lost. He was 50, thin, with the kind of face that apologized for existing. When he saw me sitting in his waiting room, he went 2 shades paler. That's a neat trick when you're already the color of old newspaper. Mr. Orton, he said, this is unexpected. I followed him into his office. It smelled like old books and older regrets. He sat behind his desk and tried to look busy with papers that didn't need his attention. I assume Mrs. Pemberton sent you, he said. I didn't confirm or deny. In my line of work, silence is cheaper than words and twice as effective. He wiped his forehead. It wasn't warm. I can't help you, Finch said. Attorney-client privilege. I told him his client was dead. He said privilege survives death. I said so do questions. He looked at me like I was a bill he couldn't pay. Arthur was very specific. The drawer remains locked, indefinitely. Those were his exact instructions, written, witnessed, legally binding. Indefinitely is a long time, longer than most marriages and all political promises. I asked Finch what happened if someone opened it anyway. He shifted in his chair. The will contains a clause. Anyone who opens that drawer forfeits their entire inheritance. Every penny goes to charity. Arthur was quite clear about that. Almost obsessively so. So Arthur Pemberton had built himself a trap, a financial mousetrap baited with curiosity. The widow wanted answers. The children wanted money. The drawer wanted to stay closed. And me? I wanted to know why a man would spend his last breath protecting an empty space. Because I was starting to think maybe that's all it was. Empty space. The most expensive kind. I asked Finch if he knew what was in the drawer. He said no. I asked if Arthur ever mentioned it. He said once. What did he say? Finch stared at his desk like it held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. He said some secrets keep themselves. You just have to give them a place to live. Philosophy from a dead man. Just what I needed. I left Finch's office with less information than I came with, which is a special kind of achievement. The fog had thickened. The city was disappearing into itself, one block at a time. I needed to talk to the children, Margaret first. She was staying at the Fairmont, mourning her father with room service and a view. Money grieves in comfort. Margaret Pemberton opened her hotel room door wearing a gray dress and an expression that could have frozen brandy. She had her father's eyes and her mother's talent for looking through people. "You're the detective," she said. Not a question. She stepped aside to let me in. The room was neat. Too neat. Like someone was afraid of leaving evidence. She offered me coffee. I accepted. It came from a silver pot and tasted like it cost more than my shoes. We sat by the window. Below us, the city pretended to be alive. "My mother's obsessed with that drawer," Margaret said. "She thinks it contains proof of an affair, or a second family, or buried treasure. She watches too many movies." I asked Margaret what she thought was in it. She smiled. "It wasn't friendly, nothing," she said. "Absolutely nothing. My father's idea of a joke. He had a peculiar sense of humor. He enjoyed watching people tie themselves in knots over meaningless things. Control from beyond the grave. Very him." She sipped her coffee. Her hand didn't shake. Professional mourner, or genuine indifference. "Did you get along with your father?" I asked. She laughed. It sounded rehearsed. "Nobody got along with my father, Mr. Orton. He was cold, methodical, and utterly incapable of affection. He treated his children like quarterly reports. We showed adequate returns, so he kept us funded. That was the extent of our relationship. I stopped expecting warmth around age 7. I asked her about Thomas. Her expression shifted, like weather changing without warning. "My brother is a disappointment," she said. The words came out smooth, practiced. "He gambles, drinks, makes poor decisions with alarming consistency. Father kept him on a tight leash. Now that leash is gone. I give him 6 months before he runs the company into bankruptcy." "You don't sound concerned," I said. She set down her coffee cup with the precision of someone who'd learned early that control was currency. "I made my own way, Mr. Orton. Publishing doesn't pay what shipping does, but it's mine. Thomas chose to stay dependent. That's his problem now, along with whatever's in that drawer he'll never open. I asked if she'd ever seen her father near the desk. Constantly, she said he'd sit there for hours, not working, just sitting, staring at that drawer like it was going to say something back. Mother thought he was having a breakdown. I thought he was enjoying his own private mystery. Turns out we were both right. He broke down slowly, mystery intact. Before I left, I asked her one more question. If she could open the drawer without losing her inheritance, would she? She looked at me like I'd asked if water was wet. No, she said. Whatever's in there, my father wanted it hidden. I may not have loved him, but I respected his wishes. Besides, some doors are better left closed. Pandora learned that the hard way. I found Thomas Pemberton at a bar on Market Street. It was 2 in the afternoon. He was 3 drinks ahead of schedule and working on number 4. He had his father's build and his mother's weakness for self-destruction. When I introduced myself, he laughed. Mother's bloodhound, he said. Come to sniff out the family secrets. Pull up a stool. First round's on me. I ordered whiskey. Thomas ordered another. The bartender poured with the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Let me guess, Thomas said. You want to know about the drawer. The famous drawer. The drawer that's going to drive my mother insane. Personally, I hope it does. She's been insufferable since the funeral. I let him talk. Drunks and children tell the truth when you stop interrupting. My father was a bastard, Thomas said. Not the fun kind, the calculating kind. Everything was a test. Everything was leverage. He'd give you something with one hand and take it back with the other. That drawer, classic Arthur Pemberton, the gift that keeps on taking. You think it's empty? I asked. He shrugged. The gesture was loose. Practiced, empty, full, doesn't matter, it's a trap. He knew we'd obsess over it. Knew we'd tear ourselves apart trying to figure it out. That's what he wanted. Control. Forever. Even death couldn't make him let go. The man was consistent. I'll give him that. Consistently terrible. I asked him about the business. His face darkened. It's bleeding money, he said, has been for years. Father ran it like a dictatorship. No innovation, no adaptation. Just the same old roots, same old contracts. I'm trying to modernize. Margaret thinks I'm destroying his legacy. Mother thinks I'm incompetent. They're both probably right. Did your father have enemies? The question sobered him slightly. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and learned too little. Everyone successful has enemies, Mr. Orton. Father specialized in making them. Business rivals he crushed. Partners he squeezed out. Employees he discarded. He collected enemies like some men collect stamps, with pride and efficiency. I asked if any of those enemies might want revenge. Thomas finished his drink. Revenge for what? He's dead. Death is the ultimate revenge. Nobody wins against that. Besides, if someone killed him, they did us all a favor. The heart attack saved us the trouble of waiting for nature to take its course. Should have happened years ago. Man had the emotional range of a filing cabinet. Before I left him to his slow-motion collapse, I asked the same question I'd ask Margaret. If he could open the drawer without consequences, would he? He smiled. It was the saddest thing I'd seen all day, and I'd seen plenty. In a heartbeat, he said. Not because I care what's inside, because I want to prove he doesn't own me anymore, but he does. Even dead, he does. I left Thomas to his slow drowning and stepped back into the fog. The city had disappeared completely now. I could have been anywhere. That's the thing about San Francisco in August. You learn to navigate by memory and faith. Neither one had ever done me any favors. I drove back to my office on Chestnut Street, a narrow walk-up above a barber shop that hadn't seen a customer since the Truman administration. The office was small, cheap, and exactly what I could afford. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out on a brick wall. I kept a bottle of bourbon in the bottom drawer for emergencies. This felt like one. I poured 2 fingers and sat down to think. Arthur Pemberton had spent his final years guarding an empty drawer, or maybe not empty, but his children thought it was a trap. His widow thought it was a treasure. The lawyer was scared. That was the part that bothered me. Howard Finch had no reason to be afraid of a dead man's prank. Unless he knew something the family didn't. Something worth keeping quiet about. I finished the bourbon and picked up the phone. There was one person I hadn't talked to yet. The maid. Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned her briefly. The help, she'd called her. People with money have a gift for making other people invisible. Her name was Rosa Morales. She'd worked for the Pembertons for 15 years. That's longer than both of Arthur's marriages and most of his business partnerships. I found her at a small apartment in the Mission District, the kind of place where the wallpaper is older than the tenants. She opened the door wearing a house dress, and the expression of someone who'd been expecting trouble, but hoping for a different delivery boy. "I don't talk about the Pembertons," she said. Her English was careful, precise. She'd learned it from books, not conversations. Mrs. Pemberton made that clear. Signed something. Legal. I told her I wasn't from the family. I was from the truth. She laughed. It was a good laugh, the kind that comes from a place where hope has been stored and occasionally taken out for air. "I know who you are, Mr. Orton," she said. "You're the detective, the one who finds things people want to stay lost. I read about you in the papers. The Kessler case, the woman who disappeared from the Fairmont." I nodded. That had been 3 years ago. Still got me free coffee sometimes. "Come in," she said. "But if anyone asks, you were never here." Her apartment was small but clean. A crucifix on the wall. Photographs of children who'd grown up and moved away. A cat that watched me like I was a trespasser, which I was, technically. Rosa sat me at her kitchen table and poured coffee. Real coffee, not the museum pieces the Pembertons served. "Ask your questions," she said. "I'll answer what I can. Then you leave." "Tell me about the drawer," I said. She looked at me over her cup. Her eyes were dark and steady, and had seen things I probably didn't want to know about. Mr. Pemberton spent a lot of time in that study. Hours. Sometimes late at night, after everyone went to sleep. He'd sit there and talk to himself. Not like a crazy person. Like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. "Did he ever open the drawer?" She shook her head. "Never. Not once in 15 years. But sometimes he'd touch it. Run his fingers along the edge. Like he was checking to make sure it was still locked, or saying hello to whatever was inside. It was strange, the way a man might visit a grave, regular, ritual, like penance without the priest. I asked her if anyone else ever tried to open it. She thought for a moment. Mrs. Pemberton tried once. About 8 years ago, Mr. Pemberton caught her with a locksmith. The locksmith was gone within the hour. Mrs. Pemberton didn't leave her room for 3 days. After that, nobody mentioned the drawer again, until he died. Now everyone wants to know. Did Arthur have any visitors? Anyone who came to the study alone with him? Rosa nodded slowly. A man. He came once a month, always in the evening, always after dark. I never saw his face. He wore a hat and kept his collar up. But I heard his voice once. Low. Educated. He called Mr. Pemberton Arthur like they were old friends, or old enemies. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. That was new. The lawyer hadn't mentioned any visitors. Neither had the family. A man who came once a month, always in the dark, always to the study. That's not a business associate. That's a ghost with a schedule. I asked Rosa if she knew his name. She shook her head. But I saw his car once. Black. Expensive. The license plate had a number I remembered. 742. I remember numbers. 742. I wrote it down. It wasn't much. But in my line of work, sometimes the smallest thing is the only thing that matters. I thanked Rosa and left her with a $20 bill she tried to refuse. I insisted. She took it like it might burn her fingers. Outside, the fog was starting to lift. The city was coming back into focus. So was something else. A pattern. A shape I couldn't quite see yet. 742. 3 numbers that meant nothing and everything. I ran them through my head on the drive back to the office. A license plate prefix, a room number, a safe combination. Or just the random fragment of a maid's memory. Rosa seemed reliable, though. 15 years of invisible service gives a person sharp eyes. The rich forget that. The rich forget a lot of things. That's why they hire people like me. Back at my desk, I pulled out the telephone directory and started calling anyone who might know someone with a black car and a monthly appointment. It was like fishing without bait. You cast enough times, eventually something bites, usually a boot. I reached a former Pemberton secretary named Helen Coyle, now retired in Berkeley. She remembered the mystery visitor. Didn't know his name either. Called him Mr. Wednesday because he always came on Wednesdays. Arthur was different on those days, Helen told me. Her voice was thin, the kind that gets thinner when you're trying not to say too much. Nervous, jittery, like a schoolboy waiting for an exam he hadn't studied for. He'd cancel meetings, clear his calendar. Whatever happened in that study, it wasn't business. It was something else, something that made him afraid. And Arthur Pemberton wasn't afraid of anything, except that. I asked her if she'd ever seen the visitor's face. Once, she said, by accident. I stayed late to finish some filing. He came earlier than usual. I saw him from the hallway. He was tall, maybe 60, with gray hair and the coldest eyes I've ever seen. Looked like a funeral director who enjoyed his work. He saw me looking, smiled. I went home early that day. Never stayed late again. The description was thin. Gray hair, cold eyes, funeral director. That described half the bankers in this city and most of the politicians, but it was something. I thanked Helen and hung up. The bourbon bottle was still on my desk. I looked at it. It looked back. We had an understanding. I poured a small one and called Howard Finch again. This time he answered. His voice sounded like he'd been crying, or gargling glass. I need to know about the visitor, I said. Silence, the kind that has, wait, I don't know what you're talking about, Finch said. I told him about Rosa, about Helen, about Mr. Wednesday. More silence. Then a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep, somewhere dark. You don't understand what you're getting into, Orton. Some secrets are buried for a reason. Arthur understood that. You should too. Arthur's dead, I said. Secrets don't die with people. They just change addresses. Finch laughed. It wasn't pleasant. You sound like him. Arthur used to say the same thing. He spent his last years trying to outrun his own past. The drawer wasn't a joke. It was a fortress. And the man who visited him, he was the gatekeeper. Or maybe the warden. I never figured out which. I asked Finch if the visitor had a name. He was quiet so long I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard Arthur call him once. Through the door, I was waiting to discuss a will revision. Arthur forgot I was there. He said, please, Lowell, not tonight. Lowell, that's all I know. And if you tell anyone I told you, I'll deny it. I'll also fire you as my dentist, which would be impressive since you're not my dentist. Lowell, I wrote it down. It wasn't much. A first name. A first name attached to cold eyes and a black car, and a monthly pilgrimage to a dead man's study. I thanked Finch and hung up. The bourbon was empty. So was my stomach. I grabbed my coat and headed out. There was one more person I needed to see. Someone who might know a Lowell with expensive taste in automobiles and a talent for making rich men nervous. The city had cleared by evening. The fog retreated to wherever fog goes when it's done being inconvenient. I drove to Pacific Heights again, but not to the Pemberton mansion, to a small apartment above a garage on Vallejo Street, the home of Arthur Pemberton's first wife, Margaret, and Thomas's mother. The woman Mrs. Pemberton had replaced. Her name was Eleanor Pemberton. She'd been divorced for 15 years and hadn't spoken to her ex-husband since. She opened the door wearing a simple dress and no makeup. She was 62, looked 50, and had the calm of someone who'd survived something terrible and decided not to let it define her. You're Arthur's detective, she said. I've been expecting you, not because I'm psychic, because Arthur always hired the same type. Desperate or curious. Sometimes both. She stepped aside. Come in. I'll tell you about Lowell. Eleanor Pemberton's apartment was small, but had a view of the bay that probably cost more than my entire building. She sat me in a chair that was older than both of us, and poured tea from a pot that had seen better decades. Lowell, she said, tasting the name like something bitter. Lowell Vance. He was Arthur's partner, not in business, in something else, something Arthur never talked about, even to me. I asked what that something was. Eleanor stared at the bay. The water was gray, the sky was gray, everything was gray. The kind of gray that doesn't promise anything. During the war, she said slowly, Arthur was stationed in Europe. He never spoke about what he did there. But when he came back, he was different, colder, more careful, and Lowell Vance was part of that. They'd served together. In some capacity Arthur wouldn't describe. After the war, she continued, they stayed in touch. Lowell would visit, always unannounced, always at odd hours. Arthur would lock himself in his study with him, and when Lowell left, Arthur would be pale, shaking, like he'd seen a ghost. I asked him once, he told me to never ask again. So I didn't, for 20 years, until I couldn't take it anymore. That's why I left him. Not another woman. Another secret. I asked her if she knew what was in the drawer. She shook her head, but I have a theory. Arthur was a collector, not of stamps or coins, of insurance. He believed in leverage. He kept files on everyone. Business rivals, politicians, even friends. The drawer, I think, contained his most valuable file. The one that protected him from Lowell, or the one that Lowell wanted. Either way, it was his sword and his shield. Lowell Vance. I had a full name now. That was progress. The kind that usually got people killed in my line of work. I thanked Eleanor and left her with her tea and her view and her 20 years of unanswered questions. Outside, the fog was creeping back. The city was drowning again. I found a payphone on the corner and called an old contact at the DMV. He owed me. It was time to collect. 20 minutes later, I had an address. Lowell Vance lived in Atherton, which is where rich people go when San Francisco isn't exclusive enough. A black sedan registered to his name. License plate 742 something. Rosa's numbers were right. I drove south, past the city limits, past the airport, past the places where ordinary people live. Atherton doesn't have sidewalks. It has private roads and security gates and the kind of quiet that feels like a warning. The Vance estate was at the end of a long driveway lined with eucalyptus trees. The house was Spanish style, white stucco, red tile roof. The kind of place where you expect to see a man in a white suit sipping something expensive. Instead, I saw a man in a wheelchair on the veranda. Gray hair, cold eyes. Even from a distance, I could feel them. Funeral director who enjoyed his work. I parked and walked toward him. He didn't move. He was waiting. Mr. Orton, he said when I was close enough. His voice was low, educated, exactly as Rosa had described. I've been expecting you. Arthur always said someone would come. He just didn't know it would be you. He gestured to a chair beside him. I sat. The afternoon sun was weak, filtered through the eucalyptus. Everything smelled like dust and old money. You knew Arthur well, I said. He smiled. It didn't warm anything. We were brothers, Lowell said, not by blood, by something stronger. Shared experience, shared guilt. We did things together during the war. Things I won't describe and you wouldn't believe. Afterwards, we made a pact. We'd protect each other, no matter what. That pact lasted 50 years, until Arthur decided he wanted out. He wanted to burn the evidence. I couldn't let him, not because I wanted to hurt him, because the evidence wasn't just his to burn. The drawer, I said. He nodded. The drawer contained our history. Every decision, every compromise, every person who helped us or hindered us. Arthur wanted to destroy it. I wanted to keep it. We compromised. He kept the drawer locked. I kept the key. Once a month, I'd visit to make sure it was still there, still sealed, still safe. Arthur called it penance. I called it prudence. Semantics, really. I asked him what was in the drawer that was so important. He looked at me with those cold eyes. Names, he said, of people who are still alive, still powerful, still capable of making trouble for a dying man like me. Arthur wanted to clear his conscience before he died. I wanted to keep my insurance. He lost. I won. And now you're here, poking around, asking questions. Do you know what happens to people who ask questions about Lowell Vance? I told him I had a general idea. He laughed. It was dry, like leaves burning. I'm not threatening you, Mr. Orton. I'm informing you. The drawer stays locked. Mrs. Pemberton gets nothing. The children get nothing. The contents will be destroyed upon my death, which, given my current condition, isn't far off. Cancer. The great equalizer. Arthur died of a heart attack. I'll die of this. We're both dying. The only difference is timing. I asked him why he didn't just destroy the contents now. He looked at me like I'd asked why water is wet. 'Cause I'm not dead yet, he said. And as long as I'm alive, I need insurance. Once I'm gone, it won't matter. The names won't matter. The secrets won't matter. Everyone who matters will be dead or too old to care. That's the thing about secrets, Mr. Orton. They have expiration dates. Most people just don't live long enough to see them. I left Lowell Vance on his veranda with his cancer and his cold eyes and his expiration date. The eucalyptus trees whispered as I walked back to my car. They sounded like they were laughing at me, or warning me. Same thing in Atherton. I drove back to the city with the windows down, letting the fog fill the car. It was cleaner than the air inside the Vance estate. Cleaner than most things in this business. Back in my office, I sat down and stared at the wall. The drawer contained names, powerful names. Names that could buy and sell men like me before breakfast. Lowell wanted them for insurance. Arthur wanted them destroyed. The widow wanted them for money. The children wanted them for closure. And me? I wanted to know why a dead man's last words were about a drawer he'd never opened. That's not curiosity. That's a professional deformity. The phone rang at midnight. I answered because people don't call at midnight to sell magazine subscriptions. It was Margaret Pemberton. Her voice was tight, the way voices get when something has broken and can't be fixed. Someone broke into the house tonight, she said. Mother's fine, the police are here. But they didn't take anything, not the silver, not the paintings. They went straight to the study, to the desk. I asked if they opened the drawer. No, she said. The lock is still intact. But they tried. The desk is scratched. The floor around it is scuffed. They brought tools, professionals. Someone wants what's inside badly enough to risk breaking into a house with a security system. I asked if the police had any leads. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from a place where hope goes to die. They said it's probably kids. Kids with lockpicks and knowledge of Arthur Pemberton's study layout. Sure, I told Margaret I'd be there in the morning. She thanked me and hung up. I sat in the dark for a while, thinking about Lowell Vance and his insurance policy. If the drawer was so important to him, why would he need to break into it? He had the key. Or did he? Maybe Arthur had changed the lock. Maybe the monthly visits weren't to check the drawer. Maybe they were to try to open it. The next morning, the Pemberton mansion looked the same from the outside. Inside, the study was a crime scene in everything but name. Yellow tape stretched across the doorway. A police photographer was packing up his equipment. The desk had fresh scratches around the lock. Deep gouges where someone had tried to force it. They'd used a crowbar, then something more delicate. Neither had worked. The drawer remained closed, stubborn as its owner. Mrs. Pemberton stood in the hallway in a robe that cost more than my rent. Her mascara was smudged. First time I'd seen her look human. They knew exactly where to go, she said. The rest of the house wasn't touched, not even the safe in the library. They came for the drawer. I asked if she had any idea who might have sent them. She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve a quadratic equation. Lowell Vance, she whispered. It has to be. I told her I'd talked to Vance yesterday. He claimed he had the key. She shook her head. Arthur changed the lock 3 years ago. He didn't tell anyone, not even his lawyer. I found the receipt in his nightstand after he died. A locksmith on Mission Street. Arthur paid cash. The lock is new. Vance doesn't have the key. That's why he's desperate. That's why he sent his people. He can't get in, and neither can we. I drove to Mission Street and found the locksmith. He was an old man named Croup, who smelled of oil and secrets. He remembered Arthur Pemberton. Nice gentleman, Krupp said. Paid cash. Asked for the best lock I had. Something that couldn't be picked, couldn't be drilled, couldn't be forced. I gave him my masterpiece. Cost him a fortune. I asked if Arthur had taken the only key. Krupp nodded. One key. He kept it on him. Always. One key. Arthur had it on him when he died. So where was it now? I called the hospital where he'd been pronounced. Then the funeral home. Then the police who'd handled his personal effects. Nothing. The key had vanished. Either someone took it from his body before anyone noticed, or Arthur had hidden it somewhere before his heart attack. A man who spends his last words warning about a drawer doesn't leave the key in his pocket. I went back to the Pemberton house and searched Arthur's bedroom. It took 3 hours. I found old photographs, expired passports, a collection of tie clips that hadn't been fashionable since the Depression. No key. Then I remembered Rosa's words. He'd sit there for hours, not working, just sitting, staring at that drawer. What if the key was somewhere in the study, not in plain sight, somewhere clever, somewhere only Arthur would think of? I searched the study again, behind the books, under the rug, inside the pen holder. Nothing. Then I noticed something. The desk had 6 drawers. The locked one was bottom right, but the one above it, middle right, had a false bottom. I'd seen false bottoms before. Usually they held cheap whiskey or cheaper magazines. I slid my hand inside and felt something taped to the underside of the drawer. A key, small, brass, warm from my touch. I held the key in my palm and looked at the locked drawer. 20 years of secrets, 50 years of guilt, a dead man's last words, a dying man's insurance policy, and me, standing in a study that smelled of old books and older lies. I could open it. I could end the mystery. Or I could walk away and let the drawer keep its secrets forever. That's the thing about being a detective. Sometimes the hardest case is knowing when not to solve one. I stood there with the key in my hand for what felt like a full minute. The study was silent except for the ticking of a clock that had probably been ticking since before I was born. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the house settling. I could hear the weight of every decision I'd ever made pressing against my temples. The key was small. It weighed almost nothing, but it felt like I was holding a loaded gun. I didn't open the drawer. Not then. Not alone. I called Mrs. Pemberton into the study. She came in her robe, her hair still wet from the shower, her eyes wide. I found it, I said, holding up the key. She reached for it. I pulled it back. If I open this drawer, everyone loses their inheritance. You, Margaret, Thomas. Every penny goes to charity. That's what Arthur wanted. Are you sure you want me to do this? She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, relief, greed, all 3 probably. The human heart is a complicated piece of machinery. I don't care about the money, she said. I didn't believe her. Nobody marries a man like Arthur Pemberton for his personality. But I nodded anyway. Call your children, I said. They should be here. Whatever's in this drawer, it belongs to all of you. Not just the widow. She made the calls. Margaret arrived within the hour, straight from the Fairmont, her hair perfect, her dress expensive, her expression unreadable. Thomas arrived 20 minutes later, smelling like whiskey and regret. The 3 of them stood in the study, a triangle of inheritance and resentment. I stood by the desk, the key in my hand. Last chance, I said. Once I turn this, there's no going back. The will is clear. You all lose everything. Open it, Margaret said. Her voice was steady. I don't want his money. I never did. Thomas nodded. Same. Whatever's in there, it's cost us enough already. Open it, Orton. Mrs. Pemberton said nothing. She just stared at the drawer like it had stolen something from her. I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, the lock clicking open with a sound that seemed too small for the weight of the moment. I pulled the drawer. Inside was a single manila folder, that was all. No gold. No diamonds. No evidence of a second family or a secret fortune. Just a folder, worn at the edges, the kind you can buy at any stationery store for $0.25. I lifted it out and set it on the desk. The three Pembertons gathered around me. I opened the folder. Inside, a single photograph and a single sheet of paper. The photograph showed two young men in military uniforms. One was Arthur. The other was Lowell Vance. They were smiling, arms around each other. The photograph was dated 1944. On the back, in Arthur's handwriting, the only good year, I set the photograph aside and picked up the paper. It was a letter, also in Arthur's handwriting, dated 3 months before his death. I read it aloud because that's what you do when you're holding a dead man's last confession. To whoever finds this, it began. I killed a man in 1944. His name was Erich Schmidt. He was a German officer. He was also unarmed. I shot him in the back because Lowell told me to. We were behind enemy lines. Schmidt had information that could have saved lives. Instead, I ended his. Lowell and I buried him in a forest outside a town called Hurtgen. I have carried that man's death for 50 years. The drawer was my confession. The lock was my penance. The letter went on to explain that Lowell had used the killing as leverage. Arthur had built his shipping empire with Lowell's help, and Lowell had collected his debt in favors, in silence, in the monthly visits that reminded Arthur of what he'd done. The drawer wasn't insurance against Lowell. It was insurance against Arthur's own conscience. He kept the key hidden because he couldn't bring himself to destroy the evidence of his worst moment. When I finished reading, the room was silent. Mrs. Pemberton was crying, not the theatrical tears of a widow. Real ones. Margaret had her hand over her mouth. Thomas was staring at the floor like it had just told him a secret. I folded the letter and put it back in the folder. "Your father wasn't a monster," I said. "He was a man who did something terrible and spent 50 years trying to live with it. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation." Margaret spoke first. "He could have told us." Her voice was raw. "He could have trusted us." I shook my head. "Men like your father don't know how to trust. They know how to control." The drawer was his way of controlling his own guilt. He didn't want your forgiveness. He didn't even want your understanding. He just wanted to stop being alone with the memory. And now he's not. Now you're carrying it too. That's the gift he left you. I left the Pembertons in the study with their father's confession in each other. They had a lot to talk about. None of it was my business. I walked out into the fog and lit a cigarette. The city was gray and wet and indifferent, same as always. I thought about Arthur Pemberton sitting in that study for years, staring at a drawer that held his worst moment. He could have destroyed the evidence. He could have burned the letter, but he didn't. He wanted someone to know. That's what I finally understood. The drawer wasn't a trap. It was a message in a bottle. He knew someone would come looking eventually. Someone would find the key, open the drawer, read the letter. He wanted the truth to outlive him, even if it cost his family their inheritance, even if it ruined his reputation. He wanted to be seen, not forgiven. Just seen. That's a kind of courage, I suppose. The pathetic kind. I drove back to my office with the fog following me like a stray dog. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone else is asleep, and you're the only one awake enough to notice how strange the world looks at 3 a.m. I poured myself the last of the bourbon and sat in the dark. The Pemberton case was closed. I'd found what they paid me to find, but I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like taking a shower. The phone rang at 8 the next morning. It was Howard Finch, the lawyer. His voice was different, lighter, like someone had removed a piano from his shoulders. "Lowell Vance died last night," he said, in his sleep. The cancer finally caught up with him. I asked if he'd left any instructions about the drawer. Finch laughed. "He left a letter. Addressed to you, actually. It arrived at my office this morning by courier. Seems he mailed it before he died." I went to Finch's office and read the letter. Lowell's handwriting was shaky, the script of a man running out of time. "Orton," it began, "you win. Arthur was always the better man. I just had better lawyers. The drawer's contents are yours to do with as you please. Burn them, publish them. I don't care anymore. I'm past caring. The only thing I ask is that you tell Margaret and Thomas that their father wasn't the villain I made him out to be. I was." The letter went on to confess that Lowell had been the one who killed Eric Schmidt. He'd framed Arthur for it, used it as leverage for decades. Arthur had gone along with the lie because he was loyal, because he was scared, because he didn't know how to fight back. The war had broken something in both of them, but only Lowell had let it turn him into a monster. Arthur had just let it turn him into a statue, immobile, silent, waiting to be discovered. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Finch asked what I was going to do with it. I told him I didn't know yet. The truth doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needs a witness. I drove to the Pemberton mansion one last time. Mrs. Pemberton answered the door in a simple dress. No perfume, no mascara. She looked like a woman who'd been crying and wasn't ashamed of it. "We're not going to contest the will," she said. "The money goes to charity. Arthur's choice." I told her about Lowell's letter. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Arthur loved him, you know," she said. "Not in that way. In the way soldiers love each other. They survived something together. That bond is stronger than marriage, stronger than blood. Arthur couldn't betray Lowell, even after Lowell betrayed him. That's not weakness. That's something else, something I don't have a word for." I left the letter with her. She could do what she wanted with it, burn it, share it, frame it. It wasn't my secret anymore. I walked out into the fog and lit a cigarette. The city was still gray, still wet, still indifferent, but something had shifted. Not in the city, in me. I'd spent 9 years opening drawers that should have stayed closed. This time I'd opened one that needed to be opened. That's not justice. That's not redemption. That's just timing. My name is Jack Orton. I've been a private detective in this city for 9 years. I've seen rich people cry and poor people lie, and everyone in between pretend to be something they're not. The Pemberton case taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't about crimes or money or affairs. Sometimes they're just about shame. A man's shame. A woman's shame. The shame of surviving when someone else didn't. The drawer is empty now. The key is back in the false bottom where Arthur left it. The mansion will be sold. The money will go to a dozen charities that will spend it on things Arthur never cared about. Margaret went back to New York. Thomas checked himself into a clinic. Mrs. Pemberton is learning to live alone for the first time in 30 years. And Lowell Vance is in the ground, next to the man he claimed to love and the secret he claimed to protect. Me, I'm still here, sitting behind this desk drinking cold coffee, waiting for the next client to walk through my door with a problem they can't solve and a check they probably shouldn't write. The rain falls, the fog rolls in, the city forgets. But I remember. That's the job. Not solving mysteries, just remembering them, long enough to write them down, long enough to make sure someone knows, even if that someone is just me.